It was the single defining mistake of my young life. I was 19, and the pressure from a group of guys I mistakenly called my friends had completely clouded my judgment. It was just a stupid dare, they said. Slipping the digital camera into my oversized hoodie pocket felt simple, almost clinical, in the moment. I genuinely thought no one was watching. But as I walked towards the sliding glass doors of the electronics store, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder with absolute authority. It wasn't my friend, it was a plainclothes loss prevention officer. My stomach bottomed out instantly. The cold, logical reality of what I had just done hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Within 40 minutes, I was sitting in the cage-like backseat of a police cruiser, staring helplessly at the mundane streetlights flickering past, my hands cuffed tightly behind my back. Because it was late on a Saturday night, the county court wasn't going to open until Monday morning. "You're spending the weekend with us, kid," the booking officer told me with a chilling indifference that was far more terrifying than open anger. I was processed, stripped of my civilian clothes, fingerprinted, and handed an ill-fitting, bright orange jumpsuit. The heavy, sliding metal door of my cell pod closed with a final, booming resonance that seemed to vibrate straight through my bones. It was a sound that sealed my fate for the next 48 hours. This wasn't a movie, this was terrifyingly real, and I was utterly, paralyzingly alone in a place where weakness was a sin. When the guard escorted me into cell 42, I saw him. He was a man who seemed to almost dissolve into the dark corners of the cramped, windowless space. Victor was in his mid-40s, with a tangled, graying beard that barely hid a jagged, nasty scar running down the side of his neck. His eyes were not merely dark, they were completely hollow, stripped of any human light or vitality. He was sitting perfectly still on the lower bunk, staring intently at the cracked concrete wall. I was terrified he would lunge at me and attack me immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he looked me up and down for a painfully long time, then pointed a calloused finger toward the top bunk. "That's yours," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that made my hairs stand on end. For that first, incredibly tense night, Victor was deceptively normal. He didn't aggressively demand to know what I was in for, and I certainly didn't volunteer the humiliating truth. Instead, he just calmly told me the basic rules of survival inside the pod, which guards to avoid, when to stand perfectly still for head count, and how to carry myself so I wouldn't become a target. "You don't belong here, kid," he told me later that night, his voice sounding almost kind, like a concerned older relative. "You're far too soft for a place like this." For a few blissful hours, I felt a twisted sense of relief wash over me. I genuinely believed I had been incredibly lucky. I thought maybe he was a father figure of sorts, someone who would protect me during this waking nightmare. But the fragile atmosphere inside cell 42 shifted completely on Sunday evening. The faint light from the single, wire mesh window at the end of the corridor was rapidly fading, casting long, monstrous shadows across our cell walls. Victor hadn't spoken a single word in hours. He was now sitting uncomfortably close to me on my lower bunk, our thighs nearly touching. His eerie calmness, which I had first found deeply comforting, now felt predatory and highly calculated. The questions started out quiet, probing, and utterly unjail-like. "Where exactly do you live, Ryan?" he asked, his intense gaze fixed entirely on my face. "Your real house. Not where you are hiding out now." My blood turned to pure ice. My name. I had never told him my name. A cold sweat began to beat heavily on my forehead. How on earth did he know who I was? "Do you have a girlfriend?" he continued, his voice a smooth, terrifyingly steady purr that didn't belong in a concrete cell. "Or do you just live with your mother? Tell me, what's her name?" I tried desperately to deflect, to ignore his questions, to stare at the opposite wall and pretend I couldn't hear him. But I was physically trapped in a tiny box with a monster. "I know things, Ryan," he said, moving even closer until his face was just inches from mine. I could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "I've been in this system a very long time. The system talks if you know how to listen." His smile was slow, sharp, and deliberate, like a hairline crack opening up in a plaster mask. He began to softly whisper descriptions of my neighborhood, of the exact park I used to play in as a child. It was deeply personal, intimate knowledge that no stranger, let alone a temporary cellmate in a county jail, should have ever possessed. I did not sleep a single second that night. Every time my eyes fluttered shut out of sheer exhaustion, I was terrified I would open them to find him directly over me. At one point, in the oppressive, dead silence of the 2 a.m. lockdown, I pulled myself together and dared to look down over the edge of the top bunk. Victor was lying perfectly flat on his back, his head propped up uncomfortably, his empty gaze fixed directly up at me. A faint, chilling smile was still etched onto his face. He never blinked. He just watched me breathe. Monday morning was a chaotic blur of processed paperwork, loud guards, and an incredibly quick appearance before a tired judge who mercifully granted me bail. As the guard unlocked my cell door for the final time, I practically leaped out into the hallway. But before the door slammed shut, Victor called out. "Wait." He was standing by the high window, backlit by the harsh dawn light, his facial features completely obscured by the shadow. "Ryan," he said, his voice an oily, unforgettable rasp. "We're almost out of here. I made you a promise, remember?" He smiled again, but this time, the sheer darkness in his eyes seemed to swallow his entire face. "Gar parmilt hain, Ryan. Wada raha. We'll meet at your house, Ryan. I promise." I ran from that jail building as fast as my legs could carry me. I didn't look back once. I ran straight to my parents' car, into the absolute safety of my lockable bedroom, trying desperately to convince myself that Victor was just a broken man with a broken mind. I told myself it was just a bureaucratic, bad dream, that would naturally fade with time. I got a stable job, I stayed indoors, and I became the perfect, quiet kid my parents always wanted me to be. A whole month passed by without incident. The terrifying memory of Victor was finally beginning to recede into the back of my mind. Then, exactly 1 week ago, my phone buzzed violently at 11:30 p.m. The text message came from an unlisted, unknown number. When I clicked on the attachment, my chest constricted so tightly I thought I was having a heart attack. It was a high-resolution picture of my own front door, taken in the dead of night from the bushes across the driveway. The single porch light cast a eerie yellow cone of illumination over the welcome mat. Below the image was a caption that made my knees buckle, "Main any apna wada pura kia." I kept my promise. I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even scream. I knew I couldn't tell my parents, they were older and it would absolutely terrify them. My first survival instinct was to delete the message immediately, to pretend it wasn't real, to block the number. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't change reality. I just sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the glowing screen, the front of my own safe haven suddenly transformed into a predator's hunting ground. The very next morning, as I walked out to my car to head to work, I noticed something heavy pinned tightly under the driver's side windshield wiper. It wasn't a parking ticket or a neighborhood flyer. It was a single, long-handled kitchen knife, rusted at the hilt and wicked at the edge. Tucked neatly beneath the heavy wooden handle was a small, torn piece of lined paper with one single word written on it in jagged, shaky handwriting, "Victor." I immediately drove straight to the police station. I showed the desk sergeant the knife, the text message, and explained the weekend arrest. The officer was polite, but his bureaucratic words offered absolutely no comfort to my fraying nerves. "It's very unsettling, son," he admitted, signing a property form for the knife. "But without a direct, explicit threat of physical harm stated in writing, our hands are tied. This man, if it even is him, is technically on parole, but he hasn't broken a specific law in our jurisdiction yet. He advised me to lock my doors, invest in a security camera, and stay vigilant." Vigilant. How on earth do you stay vigilant against a faceless ghost who seems to know every single thing about your life, while you know absolutely nothing about his? I don't go out after dark anymore. My social life is completely dead. I check and recheck every single window, bolt, and door in the house 10 times a night until my fingers are sore. Every single phone call from an unlisted number makes my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. But the absolute worst part of this entire nightmare is the silence of the night. I sit in the dark and listen, constantly, to the normal sounds of my own home, the settling wood, the wind rattling against the glass, the hum of the refrigerator. Because now, to my broken mind, every little creak sounds exactly like a heavy footstep on the porch, and every rustle of the leaves sounds like his whispered promise, carried softly on the night wind. Victor is not just a bureaucrat that I can wake up from, he is a real, living monster, and he is out there right now, sitting in the dark, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to finish what he started in cell 42. He told me I was far too soft for the real world, and he is entirely determined to prove himself right. He has successfully made me a permanent prisoner in my own home, forever trapped in a jail made of pure, unadulterated fear. I worked as a corrections officer at a high-security facility located nearly 1,000 miles away from my hometown. It was an isolating job, but I liked the routine. Because I was completely new to the area, I didn't know anyone in town, I didn't have any social media accounts, and I kept my personal life entirely to myself. The inmates knew me only as Officer Davis. During my second week on the night shift, I crossed paths with an inmate named Edgar. He was in his late 30s, serving time for a nonviolent parole violation. Unlike the louder, more aggressive inmates, Edgar was always quiet, highly respectful, and never stepped out of line. One rainy night, as I was conducting a routine head count down his tier, Edgar stepped up to the bars of his cell. He smiled politely and asked in a low voice, "Officer Davis, how is your brother Stan doing?" I froze, staring at him in utter disbelief. My brother Stan lived across the country, and I had never mentioned his name to a single soul at work. I didn't answer Edgar. I just frowned, ignored him, and walked away, convincing myself it was an insane coincidence. He could have been talking about a different Stan. But 3 days later, it happened again. As I handed him his meal tray, Edgar looked directly into my eyes and whispered, "Does Diana still live by the lake?" My blood ran cold. Diana is my mother's name, and she lives in a small house near a lake in my childhood hometown. "How do you know that name?" I demanded, pulling him aside. Edgar just shrugged, keeping that same polite, empty smile on his face. "I just know things, sir," he said softly, terrified and furious. I went to the administrative office and pulled Edgar's file. I thought maybe he was from my hometown, but his records showed he was born and raised right here and had never traveled across the country. There was no physical way for him to access my background. When I reported the creepy psychological game to my supervisor, she dismissed it. "He's just trying to rattle you, Davis. Ignore him." A few weeks later, Edgar was officially released. On his way out of the facility, he looked at me through the intake glass, tapped his forehead, and mouthed the words, "See you around." 2 months passed, and I finally began to relax, thinking Edgar was gone for good. By this time, I had started dating a girl named Sarah, and I often stayed at her apartment on my days off. One morning, while making coffee at Sarah's place, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Ring doorbell camera at my house. I opened the live feed and saw a man standing on my porch with his hoodie pulled up, completely obscuring his face. He stood entirely still for a long time, then spoke directly into the camera lens in a soft, familiar voice. "Anyone home? I've got some fresh meat in the truck I'm trying to sell." He waited, then slowly walked away. I ignored it, thinking it was just a strange door-to-door salesman. The very next night, at exactly 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed again with another Ring alert from my house. I pulled up the camera feed. It was the same man, standing in the dark, staring directly into the lens. "Hello," the voice purred through the speaker. "I still have that meat. You should really open the door and look at what I have for you." Through the night vision camera, I watched his hand reach out and slowly begin to turn my front doorknob back and forth, testing if it was unlocked. Furious and shaking with fear, I used the app's microphone feature. "I am a law enforcement officer," I shouted through the speaker. "Get off my property right now before I call the squad cars." The man stopped turning the knob. He slowly lifted his head, letting the porch light hit his face, and looked directly into the camera. He let out a massive, terrifyingly wide smile. It was Edgar. He didn't run. He just smiled at the lens for a few more seconds, turned around, and calmly walked away into the darkness. I noticed there was no truck parked on my street. He had walked there on foot. The most disturbing part of this nightmare happened a month later. Someone rang the doorbell at Sarah's apartment at 11 p.m. When I rushed to open the door, the hallway was empty, but I saw a silhouette similar to Edgar's walking quickly down the street. I never found out how Edgar discovered my brother's name, my mother's location, my home address, or how he tracked me to my girlfriend's apartment. He completely vanished after that night, but the psychological damage was done. I haven't slept properly in years. Every time my phone buzzes at night, my heart drops, wondering if the man from Cell 12 has decided to pay me one final visit. I worked as a late-night mechanic at a secluded highway service station. The garage was located right off a lonely stretch of Interstate 95, surrounded by miles of dark woods. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., and most nights, it was incredibly quiet. I usually worked alone, fixing flat tires or overheating engines for travelers passing through in the dead of night. One stormy Tuesday around 1 a.m., a battered, midnight black sedan pulled into the service bay. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing a young man named Julian. He looked exhausted, drenched in sweat, and his hands were shaking violently on the steering wheel. "Can you help me?" Julian asked, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "My car keeps sputtering, and I think someone has been following me for the last 50 miles. I told him to step out of the vehicle so I could pop the hood and take a look. As I checked the engine, Julian kept pacing back and forth near the garage doors, constantly staring out into the dark highway. He explained that he had stopped at a rest area an hour ago, where a strange man in a heavy coat had approached his window, asking for a ride. Julian had locked his doors and sped away, but ever since, a pair of headlights had been tailing him at a distance. I checked his engine and immediately noticed something highly unusual. The spark plug wires had been intentionally loosened, and a strange, metallic tracking device was magnetic clasped directly beneath his front bumper. Someone hadn't just followed him, they had tampered with his car before he even left the rest area. Before I could tell Julian what I found, a pair of headlights slowly turned off the highway and pulled into the dark, unlit edge of the gas station property. The vehicle killed its lights, completely dissolving into the shadows. "That's him," Julian whispered, his face turning completely pale. "That's the car." I grabbed a heavy iron wrench from my toolbox, feeling a wave of adrenaline hit my chest. "Stay inside the garage," I told Julian. I walked out onto the tarmac, shining my heavy tactical flashlight toward the mysterious vehicle. The high-powered beam cut through the rain, illuminating the driver of the parked car. Sitting behind the wheel was a man with a completely blank, expressionless face. He didn't roll down his window, and he didn't try to hide. He just stared directly through the glass at me, holding up a small, glowing screen. When I looked closer, I realized he was holding a smartphone, and the screen displayed a live tracking app, showing a blinking red dot exactly where Julian's car was parked inside my garage. Suddenly, the man flashed his high beams directly into my eyes, blinding me for a split second. By the time my vision cleared, his car was violently reversing out of the lot. He hit the main road, tires screeching against the wet asphalt, and sped away into the night. I immediately called the police, giving them the license plate number I had managed to catch. Within 20 minutes, 2 state trooper cars arrived at the station. When they ran the plates, the officer looked up at us with a grim expression. "This vehicle belongs to a rental company 3 states over," the trooper explained. "It was reported stolen 2 days ago by a man who is currently a prime suspect in a series of interstate stalkings. We fixed Julian's spark plugs, removed the tracker, and the police escorted him safely to the nearest city hotel. Julian arrived safely, but the nightmare didn't end there for me. 2 nights later, during my usual 3 a.m. routine, I walked out to lock the perimeter gates of the service station. Under the pale glow of the single street lamp, I noticed something resting on the hood of my personal truck. It was a brand new, identical metallic tracking device, and right next to it was a handwritten note that read, "Thanks for fixing the car. See you on the road." To this day, I never look at my rearview mirror without a knot of dread in my stomach. The man from the highway wasn't just hunting Julian, he was hunting anyone who got in his way, and now, he knows exactly where I work.